Hi, and welcome to the Conversations in Birth Confidence Summit. And today we're welcoming Samantha Nolan Smith, all the way from Australia. And she is the founder of the School of Visibility, where she supports women to speak up and be heard in the world, which is really important in birth too. So welcome, Samantha.
Thank you for having me.
You do such amazing work. I've known you for a long time now, and we do similar work in different areas. So tell me a little bit background about who you are and why you founded the School of Visibility.
Well, I started it because I was working in the online space. I had been supporting women to build businesses for quite some time. And I was noticing that people were getting stuck at a certain point, that they'd learned all the tools, they'd learned all the strategies, they were going to grow their businesses, they had all the information, but something was holding them back. And then I suddenly realized it's visibility. It's that they're afraid to be seen, or they're only comfortable being seen by a certain amount of people or a certain number of people, or they've got things that they want to share with the world. They've got things that they want to say, but they're really worried about saying them. And so what they're doing is holding themselves back from growing their businesses. And when I realized that this was going on for me, by the way, as well as for all the people that I was working with, I thought more and more deeply about what was going on and why this was particularly happening for women. And because my background before coming into the online space was in advocacy for Aboriginal communities in Australia, and it was in feminism, and I worked at the British Refugee Council actually in London. And so I had worked with people with disabilities in Canada. I had worked with lots and lots of different groups around voice and belonging and being a part of community and having influence in community, in the broader community. And as I started to think about all of that background, I realized that we have all of this conditioning, particularly as women, around not using our voices or only using them in very particular ways. And that this conditioning was having a huge impact on women in terms of running their businesses, which is what I started with, but it was having an impact on mothers hugely, and I know that we'll go into that, is having an impact in so many different industries. It's having an impact across the board for women at home and at work. And so when I realized this, I thought, well, I've got to do something about it. And so that's when I started the School of Visibility.
Yeah, fantastic. I hear it a lot in the birthing world when women are wanting to plan their birth experience, but they're scared to speak up, or even sometimes to themselves, for what they want, and certainly advocating for that with partners, friends and care providers. So it's a big subject.
It's huge. I have two children. I have a 2-year-old and a 7-year-old. So there's quite a big gap between my two children. And I started doing visibility work seriously in the middle of those two children. And the difference in the way I was with my first pregnancy and birth, and even as a mother, but less so, particularly in the pregnancy and the birthing phases, between the two children was enormous. The difference was extraordinary. And I was really very frightened in a lot of ways with my first child in terms of speaking up to what I perceived to be authority. So authority was the medical profession. And because it was my first experience of having a child, I kept deferring to, they must know better, they must know better, they must know better. And I used that story over and over to suppress my own intuitive guidance and my own body wisdom many times, not all the time, but quite often, because of a story that I had about who had the right to have an opinion in that space. And I apparently didn't have a right to have an opinion, or that was the story I was telling myself. And I know I'm not alone in having had that experience as a pregnant woman.
I think it's interesting you mentioned the spaces, because I obviously knew you in that time and you were very strong at speaking up in certain spaces. Then when you became to be a mother, it was a different story. And I guess that took you by surprise. You then went into your inner work that you do in all areas to help yourself with that.
Yeah, so this is the thing that I think is really important, is that we can be hugely confident in one area, and we can know our stuff, and we can go into those spaces, and we can feel very confident about sharing our perspectives and our opinions. But that doesn't mean that we don't have what I call visibility blocks in another area. So I see this a lot with women. If they're working for somebody else, they might feel very confident in that space, but then they move into running their own business and they're suddenly terrified of speaking up, because it's a totally different environment in which to speak up. You're really speaking up for yourself, and you're really advocating for yourself, and telling everybody about your own work, and really you're its best advocate. And so it feels very personal when you start telling people how great the work is. It feels, we have all these stories about you shouldn't toot your own horn, or lots of different phrases like that. And so it becomes very uncomfortable. And that was what I discovered with the medical profession. What I discovered when I was pregnant was I had a lot of conditioning from my mum around how you behave when you're with a doctor. So my background was that my mum, whenever we were sick, and I would say to Mum, I don't feel well, I need to stay home from school, I think. Instead of saying, okay, darling, I trust your judgment about your own body and your own health, and let's have a conversation about what's the best thing to do now, which I knew 99% of the time was to lay in bed and just rest, and that I would get better. I knew that from a very young age, that I knew that's all I needed. But she would say, if you're staying home, we're going to the doctor. Because and over and over and over again, this happened for, as long as I lived with her, which was 18 years. And so it just got embedded in my head that the doctor knows better than me what about my body, even though I knew that wasn't true. And I had sort of fought against that conditioning as a young child. But I think at some point I just stopped fighting it, because the conditioning was stronger. Mm-hmm. And so when I got pregnant, this was what was coming up, this conditioning around they know better than you about your body. Mm-hmm. So that was one thing. But I feel like there's something else, Charlotte, there around, there was a difference in the way that I was, there was something about feeling very like the medical profession was a system, right? That I would walk in. So I wanted to get into the birthing center for both of my children. I did for my second, but I had a problem getting into the program that I wanted to get into for my first. So I still got into the midwifery program, but not into the birthing center. I know every country and all sorts of places have different experiences. But what happened was, when I was trying to get into this program, I suddenly found all of this bureaucracy and administration and all of this language and culture around birthing and how you maneuver your way through the system that I had no understanding of, no experience of. I didn't realize I was, the minute I even thought about getting pregnant, that I needed to go and enroll myself in this program. So I was suddenly bombarded with all of this context in which I felt very, didn't feel like I belonged. And I felt like every step I was navigating something new and something different. And so that in and of itself was a bit of a confidence. It knocked my confidence a little bit. And I went into student mode, or I went into what I call Good Girl mode, where I was like, okay, well, I'll just do what I'm told, and I'll listen to what I'm asked to do, and then I'll do that. And that will be the best way to get through this institution and find my way through.
That's a really big dynamic that you do a lot of work on, the good girl, isn't it? That and the sort of good girl and the system, because the system is kind of a bit broken when it comes to birth, because as you said, it doesn't trust the women's bodies by its system. And then you're negotiating a big system, and then you've got conditioning as a good girl, and they're all intermingling. So what do you do to unpick all that? What do you recommend?
So I think understanding that there is this thing called the good girl is really important, first of all, because the good girl is conditioning its behavior. I call it an archetype within the patriarchal system that we operate. And that's the one who's told, play by the rules, listen to authority, do as you're told. Be nice, that's huge. Be nice, be polite, be kind. Not always be kind, but certainly be nice and be compliant. So all of these things work against us in birthing if we don't have people who are looking after us or who are advocating on our behalf. This is why I love doulas, because I think they're hugely important and very, very beneficial for women. But if we don't have somebody like that, or we don't have the confidence, or we don't have, we haven't sort of done any of this work of breaking this down, then I find I have many, many friends who have ended up having cesareans, and my second child, I ended up having a cesarean as well. So I'm not in any way making any judgment about how babies come into this world. But what I have found for myself is that a lot of women have been told by obstetricians, you're going to have a cesarean, and there's been no discussion about it. There's been no equality in conversation about it. It's just been, I'm telling you that this is happening, and it's happening. And when I've inquired, because we have a very high rate of cesarean section in Australia, I think it's like 30% or something like that of our birth. And what is the World Health Organization recommendation?
Their
10%?
recommendations is 10%, and that's quite high, actually. I mean, and like, it seems low because we're used to the common in the Western world. It's commonly 30 and above in some areas, but actually 10%. So it sounds low. But when you look at people who do things differently within a smaller area, they might take all women, but they're like the Ina May Gaskin Birth Centre, and there's one in Australia. Actually, I can't remember the name. I'll look it up. And they have a much lower rate again than that, because they have continuity of carer, women that believe and trust in it. They let the body go without inducing, unless there's a medical need rather than dates or protocol. And they support the woman, and then they transfer when the woman needs to. And sometimes that's her that says she needs to, as well as working together. The rate comes right down. And that's without necessarily some of the inner work that you do, which again brings it right down again. So
we're right up there in the 30s in Australia. And one of the stories, and this is anecdotal, but it feels like it's happening all over the place, and of course there's a reason that we're at 30+%, is when I investigate with some of my friends around why did they tell you you have to have, like, it's presented not as an option or a discussion, it's you have to have a cesarean. And they said, well, the baby's very big. And I'm like, what are you talking about? There are all these random kind of like crazy things about size of babies, where I know many other women who've had babies perfectly, vaginally, perfectly naturally at bigger sizes than that. And I'm like, this is craziness. This is like, at this point, this is doctors saying, I'm just gone so far down the path of risk aversion that I just want every baby. I don't want to generalize over all doctors, but there seems to be a massive move toward as many children as possible. If we can just get them out by C-section, then that'll be quick and fast. And that's the way that I, as the doctor, have the most amount of control over the process.
And they feel comfortable with that, I guess. When it's coming from fear, there's a comfort level with what they know best, where they can section, and they feel comfortable because the positive intention is, we're helping this baby and this mother, but it's got more. And that's another reason it's hard to go against, because
this is why it's very hard to, because it's presented as, this is altruistic. This is me caring for you in the best way that I know how. And I'm a surgeon. I know, I've got surgical training. I know how to do this. I'm the expert. And so then and what you're essentially doing when you challenge it is you're going up against an entire profession's ethic and way of approaching the human body and way of managing risk when they care for the human body. So that is quite a challenge to advocate for yourself if you're looking for a different path. And then on top of that, you have the good girl conditioning, which says, don't challenge authority, don't speak up, be compliant, do as you're told, be nice. So even when women try to challenge, we challenge in a way that often we are conditioned to do, which is, I was just wondering, well, would there be a possibility that we could do it another way? And, or, we're very backward in asking for what we want often. And then the doctor doesn't either hear that or doesn't see it as a genuine request for a proper conversation about it. And so then just goes along in their own way. With my second child, I had some different experiences with doctors over the course of the pregnancy and birth. And because I was so confident about speaking up at that point, I would continue to ask questions until they gave me every answer that I required. And two different doctors said to me, well, I like, you're asking a lot of questions, or why do you need to know so much, or something along those lines. And I was like, it's my body and it's my pregnancy and it's my child, and you're providing me with a service. And until you provide that service at the level that I require, we're going to sit here until you give me the answer. But the response told me they were very unused to being questioned on any level about anything. And I thought, wow, the divide is much bigger than I realized. And we have a long way to go as women to cross that bridge. So I think that first step is the step of understanding we've got a whole lot of conditioning around that's not working in our favor, that we have to break down. And so that's why a lot of the work I do is inner work, because that's the best way I know to clear out old stories, old beliefs, questioning, and things that lead to us to question ourselves and feel not confident in ourselves. But awareness in and of itself is huge. I think surrounding yourself with women who know how to speak up, who feel confident about birthing, I think surrounding yourself with people like yourself who have wisdom about birthing, about the body of a woman through the pregnancy process. I think surrounding yourself by as many supportive women as possible with wisdom, who aren't coming at you with some kind of judgmental, it's this way or no way, but are coming at you with, here's some information, and I see you as a powerful sovereign being who will make choices that work for you. And if I can provide you with some support, assistance, information on that journey, then, I'm honored to be able to do that. Then when you can get that around you, then you can operate in exactly the way that you're designed to operate as a pregnant woman, which is you're the center, the epicenter of the whole universe when you're pregnant, and everybody else is there to help you, and you are directing the traffic. And that's exactly what my second child, my pregnancy with him and his birth was exactly like that. It was, I knew what I wanted. I wasn't taking anybody's guidance that I didn't ask for. I certainly wasn't taking on unsolicited advice. I knew what kind of team I wanted around me. I nearly repeated the same pattern of when I tried to get into the birth center. They first of all went, oh, hang on, have we lost your information? And I went, this is not happening again. And so I had a little old pattern there that I needed to clear out. So I cleared it out. And then I just built this amazing team around me of people who could support me in the way that I wanted to be supported. And my midwife during that whole pregnancy, because I was 42 at the time I had my second child, and she was saying to me, you are having a textbook pregnancy. She said, I have not got another woman like you in my whole practice at the moment. You are it. You're just extraordinary. And I was so happy to be able to be that model of, because there's all these other stories, of course, about how old what happens at a certain age and so forth. And I was so happy to be able to be the example of how that is also a limiting story. Not to say that that there aren't some women who absolutely come into early menopause and so forth, but there's a limiting story, which is having women at 30 panicking about they're not pregnant yet, which is insane. Like, it's just crazy that we've got to a stage where women are so frightened now of the hysteria that's come out of certain sections of the population, that they're now like, oh, it's too late, I'm going to miss my window. And I'm like, what are you talking about? You just turned 30 yesterday. So all of those things.
Yeah, it's wonderful to hear what a different experience you had, that it was an empowered cesarean birth where you were the epicenter, you were choosing, going along with your flow, what you and your baby wanted. And it reminds me of something you'd said, where some of the inner work is the challenge of when the system is broken. If you set yourself up against the system, you're perpetuating this fight, this war. But can you do the inner work to believe that the system can support you even though it's broken? Because there are people within the system who are on board. So this is and it's an interesting one, because we want to change the system, but you're pregnant right now and you've got like 9 months. It's a big job. So where do you go? What would you say about that, with that journey to find your way through the system even though it's broken?
I think the key is to have your own navigation system finely tuned, so that and what I mean by that is that what your body is telling you about what's right for you. You know what your intuition is telling you. So that takes practice. That's, if you're not in the space of listening to your intuition, then that's going to take some practice to play with it and start to trust it. And then if you're not used to listening to your body, then that's the kind of thing you can do. And the beauty of being pregnant is it kind of forces you to listen to your body in a way. I mean, I think there are women who can pretend that they're not pregnant for a while and just keep, go. But the most of us, our body says stop, and you get nausea if you're pushing too hard or you're tired. And so there's lots of things that the body's doing to tell you, slow down and speak to me and come into conversation with me. So listening to your body, learning how to listen to your body, the whole 9 months will teach you that. And even before that, even to get pregnant in the first place, there's a whole phase around being able to listen to your body, I believe. And then to be very clear on not the exact path, but what you want to be feeling through the process. So to me, these are very different things, because you can set yourself up and say, it's got to look like this, or it's not going to be the perfect birth. And that's quite often quite fear-driven as well. And it's control-based, because it's like, I've got to make it this perfect birth. And otherwise it means something about the child or me, or what kind of mother I'm, blah, 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 all these stories. But if we can say, through this whole process, whatever unfolds, I can be open to that. And through it all, I want to feel empowered. I want to feel focused, or I want to feel confident, or I want to feel direct in my thinking, or I want to feel whatever it is, supported, loved, nurtured, then whatever unfolds. Because for me, I ended up with cesarean after I'd already been in the birthing center, in the pool for 10 hours, in and out of the pool for 10 hours, birthing that way. It was beautiful. My daughter was with us, my husband and my daughter were there. My daughter was just turning 5 at the time. She was like patting my shoulder and saying, Mama. It's just lovely. It's beautiful. And then circumstances changed, and the doctors came in and talked me through the option. And so I said, just now, I just need you to step away for a minute, and I need to sit with this. And so she stepped away and I sat with this and I breathed into it. So this is the same. I was accessing my intuition. This is in the middle of, contractions. So it was a thing.
Yeah.
I was breathing into it. I was still contracting. So I was breathing out. I was checking my body. I was checking my intuition. I do a little body check, like a kinesiology thing. What is my body telling me to do right now? What's the best thing for this child and for me? And everything in my body and my being and my intuitive guidance said cesarean time. So I said, doctor, I'm going to do the cesarean. She said, okay. And then when I went into the theatre, it was a room full of women. There wasn't a man in sight, and I was quite happy about that because I just love the idea of it, the whole team being women. And everybody was in a joyous mood because it was a Sunday morning. It was a kind of fun Sunday morning, atmosphere. The anaesthetist was talked me through the whole thing. She was a mum of 2 children herself. We were chatting about her 2 children. It was beautiful. It was a beautiful experience. And I remember thinking, I'm being cared for by angels. Like, this is just this is a group of angels who are here to help me. So why I wanted to share that story in that level of detail is because the system can be experienced in positive ways and negative ways. And whilst the system is needing massive overhaul and transformation, you as an individual, if you are coming from a state of feeling confident and powerful, can find your way for the system to work for you. And that, I think, is the best we've got at the moment.
Yeah. I think I'm nearly in tears. Your story is so beautiful. I can really picture it. And it's a really powerful story on so many levels that you had.
Well, then then the beauty of it was, because I had been in the birth centre, I then went home and had my midwife visit me every day for 2 weeks at home. So I felt and this is the other bit, Charlotte, that I think is really important as well. I then stayed in hospital for a few days because after a cesarean, that's necessary. And I had to use my advocacy again about speaking up. So they wanted to send me home after 2 days. I didn't want to go home after 2 days because I was feeling so supported in there, and I was feeling so like I'm really pulling, like my husband and I just felt like we need one more day in hospital. So they tried to discharge me, and I said no, I'm not going. Like, I'm not going. So they ended up, because I was just firm and refusing, and I was like, you can carry me out if you want, but I'm not leaving. I then worked the system in my favor again and so they kept me in for another day. And then the drugs that they were taking for the pain, I'm not very good on that level, like that kind of level of drugs. And one of them was slightly hallucinogenic. Maybe not for people who aren't very sensitive to drugs, but I'm extremely sensitive. And at one point I felt like I could see I felt like my skin was looking like lizard skin. So I was like, I'm hallucinating, I think. So I said to the doctor, I'm not taking that drug anymore. And she said, well, something on the lines of, you have to. And I said, no, I don't. You can recommend it to me, but it's my choice whether I take it or not.
Yeah.
And she looked at me again. It was like, who is this woman and why is she speaking to me in this manner? And I said, I'm not taking it. So go away and work out what other options you've got, and then come back and let me know. And so she came back and she said, okay, I've thought about it and this and that. So it's just this little bit of pushback that was required for her to do something differently. And then, of course, I had 2 weeks of just perfect, beautiful, supportive midwifery support, particularly around breastfeeding and so on and so forth. And so I had this beautiful combination of drawing the best of the medical profession out of them, and then getting all of the other support that was already beautiful and exactly as I would want it anyway.
Yeah. I think that's really beautiful, because we do need to operate as an individual in that moment, even if we have a desire for the whole system to be changed. And who knows how much you're actually changing the system by just the doctor going, oh, she questioned me. And then a process, it starts that way. And you just don't know how big an impact that might be having. And someone's witnessed your birth and that's inspired them. And I love the way it ripples out like that.
Me too. I love it.
So, yeah, how exactly do you define confidence? Because I hear a lot of people sometimes when they think of confidence meaning you don't have any fear anymore. And that's not what I think. I think it's more like confidence to be yourself and to allow the full spectrum of emotions and still stay true to something you want. So how would you define confidence?
I like your description. And I think for me, it's if you want to go for ultimate confidence, it's embodiment of self-worth. It's embodiment of your own self-worth. And when you are really, what I mean by embodiment of it is not that you think that you're valuable, but that you live your value. You're living that in every cell. There's not a question of your own value. And then when you come from that place, things that other people might find frightening, you don't find frightening. Like even some of the descriptions that I've given you around the birthing and the way that I spoke to the doctors and things, some people might think, oh, I'd never speak like that to a doctor. But if you are really embodied in how valuable you are, and by the way, how valuable every other person on the planet is, then you don't pull back from that, and you don't pretend to be smaller than you are. You show up as this incredible being that you are, and you interact with people knowing that that's exactly who they are, even if they're not showing up in that way in that moment. And so I think that every time we get fearful, what it actually is an invitation to further understand our value, to further understand just how important and beautiful and magnificent we are. And as we grow into that, we become more embodied in our own value, and the fear drops away, because the fear is the fear of I'm not good enough, I'm not enough, whatever the I'm not enoughness is. But no, embodiment of your own self-value is the response to that. If you could know your own value, truly how valuable you are, the question of being enough would never arise, ever.
I love that. And it's so important, because my journey of exploration is still ongoing. I still get fearful sometimes in authority or systems, or the big journey is that as a mother, I think again there's that level of conditioning that mothers become invisible and they sacrifice themselves for their children. So as soon as you become pregnant, you're on that journey, you're stepping into it, and our role models previously were less diverse than they are now, the path of motherhood. So there's a confusion, like when we look to what is like your mother or your grandmother, what's happened, there's a confusion, and then I kind of just didn't even see. It's like the blind spots. I'm a big fan of looking at blind spots, which you need support for because you can't see them. But my blind spot was working on my own value and feeling more valuable. And there was a ceiling on it that I hadn't seen. So that as I got more children, I had my third when I was 42, he's now 2, that there were no gaps left for me to slot myself in a little bit unseen, not making a noise, because there's still some good girl stuff coming in there. And when I saw it, I was like, oh, how could I not see that? And then there's that more journey for more value. And I think it's such another big area of the archetype of mother, self-sacrificing everything for her children. And so when you're operating from that point, there's no space for anything.
No, there's nothing. I mean, it's absolutely. So when I talk about good girl, one of the faces of the good girl is the good mother, of course. That she is the one who is eternally sacrificing, always loving, always kind, never yells at her children, always compassionate toward them. You know, this.
It doesn't match with the reality of mothering. So then you feel really bad every time you yell or shout or get cross. Even if you don't yell, you're feeling cross. So you failed inside as well as outside. It's so much pressure.
It's so much pressure. It's so much pressure. And it comes from, as you say, it comes generationally through the lineage of the mother line. And we observe it through the patrilineal line as well, of course, but particularly strong through the mother line. And one of the things that I really had to work on when I became a mother, or one of the things that came up for me to see, was how much I had judged my own mother for not being perfect, for not being there more. And I realized I had set up these huge expectations around how she should behave based on what everybody was telling me in society about what motherhood looked like and supposed to be like, that I didn't have for my father. I had a totally different set of expectations, and they were much lower. They were much, they were around being a breadwinner and so forth. So there was a monetary component to that, of course, but there was he wasn't the one who was supposed to provide me with all the emotional support and all the logistical support in my life and all that, and understand everything and make sure that I had confidence in myself and blah, 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 all these stories. And it just, when I could see that I had done this to my own mother, I had deep compassion for her. And I had deep compassion for myself, because I suddenly knew what was coming for me. And I just decided in that moment, there is no way you are going to be able to live up to that. There is just no way. Even if you tried to do everything right, you were going to fail over and over and over again. And for many, many reasons, not just the conditioning reasons, but because you're a human being, and all of this other thing, and you are into emotions, and there are stories about anger not being appropriate for women and mothers and all of this kind of stuff. So I knew I'm never gonna be able to live up to any kind of archetype, and so I'm just going to be in a constant state of self-compassion, compassion for myself, that I'm doing the best that I can, that I'm connected to my intention as a mother more than I am about the everyday detail of whether I said the right word there, or whether my daughter, it chose to interpret this thing in a way that I meant or didn't mean, or, I have all sorts of random conversations with her. She says, "Oh, mummy," and I'm like, I don't even understand, why was that upsetting to you? Like, that's what I'm thinking in my head, and I know in that moment, I can see her when she's decided to take it on, and she's decided to attach something, which is all about the young ego starting to form and starting to really choose where to be wounded and where not to be wounded. So I'm watching it all. It's fascinating as a mother to watch this all happening, and to work out what's mine, to take responsibility for, what's hers, where's the balance in all of that, how do I not interfere with her growth process, is what I want to say there. So how do I guide her without dominating her, and without giving her the chance to make her own mistakes, learn her own lessons, grow in the way that she is supposed to grow for her own life purpose, without being too influenced by me. Obviously hugely influenced by me because I'm her mother, but still give her her own freedom to make those choices for herself. And all of that requires, a breaking down of the good mother, because the good mother wouldn't think like that. The good mother would say, well, it's my responsibility to make sure that she's happy in every moment. No, it's not. That's not your job, actually. The job is to build a a responsible, resilient human being who steps forth in their own path and falls occasionally and knows how to pick themselves up from falling. That's a valuable human being. When you can help to create a human being like that, that's a valuable contributor to our society, and ultimately that's the mothering job.
Beautiful. And that was a lesson I had as well. When I wanted my first son, I wanted to make sure he never felt sad or hurt, or that's the immediate instinct, and it was like, that's doing him a disservice. That's saying he can't handle it.
Yeah.
But he can handle it, actually, and it's supporting him to handle that, supporting him to grow into handling his emotions, and it's a different
and he
feel.
needs to learn. He needs to learn how to manage them. Otherwise, you do a massive disservice, because you're not going to be around all the time. Yeah. So at some point, he's going to go into the world and go, oh my God, no, but people don't treat me the way my mother treats me. That's a terrible thing, to be so badly prepared for the world. I had this very conversation with my mother once where I said, I feel like you over-mothered me at times, and I'm not. And I understand why you did, but I wasn't prepared for so many parts of the world, because you kept taking responsibility for things that I needed to take responsibility for. And we both looked at each other. It was a real lesson for both of us, because it taught me about how to let go earlier with my own children. And it taught her, she was like, oh my gosh, I just thought that was what my job was. Yeah. And that's what my mother did and her mother did.
Yeah. Which is why it's so important to look at the patterns, I think, because otherwise you unconsciously repeat them. And even when you look, I mean, I unconsciously repeated a lot of what my mum does, where I'm doing everything, because it's quicker and easier for me to do everything until it's not, until I fall down. But I hadn't noticed it. So when you stop and look, and that's why this conversation is so useful, because people cannot, some mistakes, we all have to make our own mistakes, but some we can avoid them. It's great, but you don't know what you don't know. So just hearing something in a conversation can start off a different way of doing something, and you learn your mistakes along that way, but you might avoid some of the biggest ones.
Well, you know what's so funny about that? I feel like having had a career before I became a mother is actually hugely beneficial to my mothering, because I used to think, when I had a big team who used to answer to me or work to me, they used to say, Sam, 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 all day long. And I'd be like, it's like having a bunch of children. It's like having a bunch of children. And what I learned from that was delegation. I learned to empower them to have the answer, find the answer themselves. And so I take that very skill into my mothering. And so when my children are saying, mum, 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 all the time, I apply the exact same skill where I delegate back to them. I teach them how to take responsibility for themselves. Obviously, my 2-year-old, that's a very different kind of way you do it with a 2-year-old than you do with a 7-year-old. Yeah. But, he can get his own shoes, and there's little things he can do. He can pick up his toys after he's played with them. He can put them away. He can learn different things that then, as in the workplace, I used to think, it'll just be quicker if I do it myself. And I very quickly learned, if you do that, then you may as well just get rid of the whole team and just do everything yourself, which is insane. And everyone will keep bringing stuff
to you then, because they see that you do that.
Exactly. And so I think, okay, with my mothering, it's worth the investment of time now, because I'm going to get back hours, days, weeks, months of time down the track by doing that. So
yeah, that's what I think when I'm taking a long time to put the washing out or to do things. And people say, but it's so time consuming to do X, Y, Z, like, washable nappies. And I'm like, what else would you be doing with your time if you're with your child as you do it? Make that the fun thing.
Exactly.
And it feels overwhelming, the thought of it sometimes, before you actually do it. That's what I found. And what I also find when I work with people is what you've just said. Every person that comes has got their own life path beforehand, and all of that is setting them up. So there'll be some skill, and it's different for everybody. You might have been a plumber, you might be a singer, you might be different things. The skills that you learned there, you can use them, turn them to because that's where you've become skillful in your own way, and then you can use them in that journey. And I see it time and again where people have got something and they don't know they've got this goal, that they've got this skill already. Maybe it's how they sing. I'm like, well, that's how you give birth. It's the same process. Or maybe it's like finding solutions with plumbing. These are real life examples, and it's like, yeah, that's how you find your solutions. It's the same skill. You've already got it. You know it. You've got it. Now you apply it in this way, and it's really great.
I love that. I love that. And I actually, with the birth of my first daughter, with my first child, I had high blood pressure toward the end of that pregnancy. It was fine up until last month, 6 weeks. And so the blood pressure was quite high. And so they're monitoring me for preeclampsia. And so I was going in 3 times a week to the hospital to be monitored to make sure that everything was fine. And that was quite a process in and of itself, of going in all of the time. And then at one point, the doctor said, I'm just going to induce you. And I said, I'm sorry, did we go into preeclampsia? Because you didn't tell me that we did. And they said, no, we haven't. And that was the moment where this thing of, you've already got that skill. And I thought, my background is in the law. And I thought, Lawyer Sam is coming out now. And so,
yeah. Because you know your rights, and you need to know your rights when you're going up against the system in that way.
Exactly. And I said, no, we're not. We're gonna wait. If we go into preeclampsia, then we'll have a conversation about it. But up until that point, I am going home. And the same thing happened then. It was every birth is such a beautiful teaching experience, isn't it? Such a great learning experience. It's just, everything is perfect for your life and what you need to learn. I really believe that. And so with that birth, I wanted to get out of the hospital. See how different it was? Like, the first birth, I was desperate to get out of the hospital after the baby was born. Second birth, I was desperate to stay in. I wasn't desperate, but I was like keen to stay in. I was like, I'm loving it here. But with the first one, I really wanted to get out. I was like, I want to go home. I want to be around my family had come to visit, and I just wanted to be around my family. And because I'd had this high blood pressure issue, the doctor didn't want to release me from the hospital, didn't want to discharge me. And so I started an advocacy campaign in the hospital, where every midwife that would come in, or every nurse, would say, I want to go home. I want to go home. I want to go home. So I must talk to 8 different people during the day, waiting. The doctor was coming in that evening, saying, I want to go home. And they kept coming in and saying, we hear you want to go home. We hear you want to go home. We're going to talk to the doctor. We're going to get the discharge papers, blah, blah, blah. And I had everybody on my side. Like, I had the... And I said, yes, I want to go home. And she said, I can't let you go home. And I said to her, is this a jail or is this a hospital? And she said, it's a hospital. And I said, then I can go home, can't I? And she said, well, I don't advise it. And I said, well, at least we're talking the real language now. Your advice is, this is your advice to me. And I understand your legal obligations. I am perfectly happy to sign a waiver, whatever needs to happen. So then she was like, okay, we finally got on the same page about what we were actually talking about, which was her duty of care, my decision as responsible human being of my own body to make a choice about these things. And so, we signed the documentation which said I was acting against her advice. And once she had done that, she really became a human being again. And she was like, I am really worried about you. And I said, okay. And I'm really worried about staying in the hospital because it's making me anxious to be here. And I know that the minute I get home,
the minute you're going to have less blood pressure problems at home.
I know, exactly. I said to her, the minute I get home, my blood pressure is going to go down. I can guarantee it. And she said, all right, but please, will you get a blood pressure machine? And I could see then, this was this moment where I could really see she was genuinely concerned about me. And she was genuinely just doing what she thought was the best for me. And I really had to just work through her own training to speak to the human being behind the, behind all of that training. And when we got to that, I was like, yes, of course I'll go and get a blood pressure machine. I'm not on a death wish here. I don't want to have a heart attack in the middle of the night, or a stroke, I think was the concern. But I also know my body. I know and I know how I'm going to feel when I go home. And of course my blood pressure went straight down as soon as I got home. But again, it was what you're saying. It was I really had to lean into my own skill set there and go, nobody's going to do this but you, and you are trained in advocacy, for goodness sake. Like, if you can't advocate for yourself, what hope is there for other women in the world? And when I remembered that about myself, then I could use that. So I love these examples of, when you look at your own life and you remember the skills that you do have, then of course you can bring them into the birthing experience.
Not more than we realise. So yeah, we've talked about some really great things. So what is your vision for the future of birth and motherhood, and if we were to summarise it in just the energy of the future vision that we're all working towards?
I mean, I really see an integration of a proper integration of what I call masculine and feminine practices. And in order, okay, so what I mean by masculine and feminine practices are, there are a lot of practices around birthing and sacred wisdom around birthing, which has been either lost. I don't even want to say lost. I think suppressed or hidden is a better way to describe that I would love to see come back. And I really want to see as the dominant force in the birthing industry. I don't even want it to be called an industry in the future, but that's another thing. In the experience of birthing of women. And I want the medical profession, which at the moment is a very masculine system, to be available to anybody who wishes to use it, but not be the dominant thing. So I love Western medicine for when you have a car accident, when you desperately need surgery and you need to be cut open and something needs to be taken out of you, or you've been shot and you need, we don't get shot much in Australia, but you know what I mean, that kind of thing. I think the Western medical system works very well for those things, and I think that's absolutely fine. But what I would like to see is that it be minimized in terms of its significance in the birthing experience of women, and that what rises up instead and becomes the dominant experience for women around birth is that our wisdom is respected, acknowledged, understood, shared, that everybody understands that the person who is the most important person in the birthing experience and in the pregnancy experience is the woman, and then the child, and she is the best person to make decisions about her body and the growing child inside of her. I would love to see a situation where once a woman actually, well, for two things. First of all, I'd love to see a situation where all women feel very empowered to say what they want through their pregnancy and in their birth, and that's respected and honoured, and that is not even a question. It's just, of course, that's the way we would do things. Why wouldn't we do things like that? And that whatever choice she makes because it's the right choice for her, and that she's got the buffet of options and then she can choose from the buffet. But if we have women who are very empowered in themselves, as we were talking about before, about my understanding of what it is to be a confident woman, it's very unlikely that there are going to be that level of cesarean in the future. They'll, as you say, they're going to plummet to like 1 or 2% or something very, very small eventually, if we have this situation where women are operating very differently in themselves and the whole of society supports and encourages that would be a different thing. And then finally, what I would love to see is a very different experience of the postnatal period, that what some people call the 4th trimester, but even beyond that. But let's just say that first phase of particularly when you're a first-time mum, but but all children, of a much greater level of support for a woman, because there's such isolation that's going on. There's so much loneliness that's happening. There's so much that the woman steps into this overwhelming experience of being a mother for the first time, physically recovering from, at best, exhaustion, and at worst, some sort of birth trauma and everything that's in between, recovering from all of that. And then, by the way, there's all these people visiting her, and then there's all those social norms around, well, you better make them a cup of tea and all your hats.
Out comes the good girl again.
Exactly. Out comes the good girl.
The good girl, the good mother, the good hostess, all rolled into one.
I know, what a nightmare. And then all of the conversations that haven't been had in the past. I mean, my mother's group is incredible. We talk about everything, and nothing's off the table, and there's no judgment. Literally, it's just like, do whatever you have to do, sister. Whatever you have to do to get through the day, we're with you. But that's not happening for all women, where they don't have a supportive group of mothers and fathers and mother and parents and aunts or whomever. They don't have the village to help them so that they can just rest into the newborn phase and just be with the baby. Like, that's it. No pressure to go back to work, no pressure to do any of the other stuff. Just be with the baby. And then if we could continue that for the rest of that level of support around family, because it really moves from mother and child to family support. And if we could genuinely have societies that put family in the heart of social policy and resource allocation within budgets and so on and so forth, then we would have a very, very different society. And I think we would have a much healthier society. We would have people who are much more emotionally intelligent, and it would just be a whole new world.
I love the sound of that word. Comes
Me
back
too.
to value again, valuing yourself first, and then it spreads out. I love that. Yeah, so we're coming to the close. We could probably talk all day, but do you have any final thoughts, particularly if a woman's listening to this and she's currently pregnant and scared, essentially, and wants to find that confidence, but it's still feeling out of reach for her, where she could start or what she could really take on from the chat today?
I think this summit is an excellent start. I think this is a great. I think the more that you can, hear from other women and surround yourself by other women, as I've said, the better you'll be. I think remembering it's your body, your choice, use your voice in that is hugely important. So coming back to that, one of the things that we're not conditioned to do is respect women's bodies in all sorts of areas in patriarchal societies, where women's bodies are very, very disrespected in an inordinate number of ways. And one of the ways that shows up is in the birthing process and in pregnancy and so forth. So to remember that that's a conditioning. And if you can then, the first step in undoing that conditioning is to learn to love your own body. And you're not going to love it straight up. I still don't love parts of my body to this day. I look at it and I still see, I'm still, little judgment comes up, and I notice the judgment though now, whereas in the past I would have judged and not even thought anything of it. I would have just judged that fact or that, whatever it is, that, what are they called? Cellulite, or that stretch mark, or, whatever it is, and I wouldn't have even thought a thing. So it's not going to happen overnight, the loving of the body. But if you can start with just looking at your body from the perspective of the magnificence of its operation, just purely from, my God, my fingers can actually do this. Like, how incredible is that? And my neck can do this. And, you can start to have a different relationship with your body. Then you can start to respect your body in a different way, in a way that hasn't been perhaps encouraged in the past. And everything can unfold from there. And there is just one thing I want to know, because I think it's really important, which is the role that sexual assault also plays in the birthing experience. So talking about disrespected bodies, one of the ways that women's bodies have been deeply disrespected is that many of us have been sexually assaulted in our lives. And what I have discovered for myself is that all can, I'm not saying it definitely does, but can come up through the birthing process. And so if that is in your past, then if you haven't had healing work around that, that's massively important to do, particularly if you think you're going to have, because you're so used to feeling disempowered when it comes to your body, and you get messages around your body, you don't have choice around what happens to your body. So this was playing out for my first birth as well, about why I didn't stand up to the medical profession as often as I should have. Was all of this old story around other people get to choose what to do with your body. You don't get to choose. So if that's part of your experience as well, then there's absolutely, first of all, recognizing that is probably a story that you've got somewhere, or some messaging that you've inherited, not inherited, that you've internalized around how to be even in your own body. And when you can work through that and give yourself permission to use your body as you wish it to be used, and to set boundaries around who does and who doesn't have access to that, that will have huge knock-on effect for the birthing process as well. So I just think that's really important to mention, because it's a sort of a subset of the birthing experience, but because so many women have some level of experience with that, it's very important that this be spoken about more often, I think.
Yeah.
But if we just come back, first of all, to the respecting of own body and love for own body, and that's its own journey for everybody, we can start there, and your body, your choice, your voice.
I love that. Thank you so much, Samantha. It's been a really wonderful conversation today, and I hope it's sparking off some great ripple effects on the people listening, and will be changing the face of birth and motherhood in our own individual journeys. And it's been a pleasure to speak to you.
It's been absolutely my pleasure too. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for all the work that you do with women around this. I think this is incredibly important work on the planet.
Yeah, it'll all be out there, visible with our voices. Excellent. So, thank you. I never know how to end these things at the end of the video. Like, bye. And then, this is like the outtake that'll go on because I'm not editing them. So I'm gonna say bye now.
Bye.
Bye.